Maybe this is my memorial or something.
Well, of course, that's the first question. I mean, how does it feel to watch all of your films? They did a beautiful job.
Well,
You did a beautiful job.
Well, actually, I have to say it was beautifully put together. I hadn't seen that tribute until now, and really lovely to see a lot of the images on the big screen.
Yes.
So beautiful. But of course, you know, as a vain young woman looking at myself going, oh, look at my baby face.
What I loved about it is the diversity of the women, and some of the notes. What I was reading is she always has a strong female protagonist, but I think that trivializes what it is this celebration, I think, of women that really comes across in your work.
Oh, thank you. I would think that they could do an alternative clip, which is listing all the sexy men that I've worked with. Starting from Sam Neill, and then Mel Gibson, and then Ray Fiennes. So there are many incredible male actors I've worked with, and their stories are just as important to me.
So I want to start, of course, because it's such an astonishing fact that my brilliant career in directing, and you were the first female director in nearly 50 years. How did that in Australia? How did that even happen? I mean, were you conscious of that?
Oh, yeah, yes. Everyone in the whole country was conscious of that. It was a huge thing.
Yeah.
I was very, very lucky to end up with a career in film because actually when I went to art school thinking I'd like to do something in theatre and arts and found the film course, we didn't actually even have a film industry in Australia. And so I'm really only here thanks to the people who lobbied for our government to set up an Australian Film Commission to fund and develop our own stories and our own filmmakers. So it was just one of those really lucky things. I mean, I probably would have gone, I think, probably into theatre or, you know, obviously, or television. But our film industry all started happening just as I graduated. So, you know, I was very, very lucky, and I went to 2 film schools. I was a slow learner. So the second one, which was like a postgrad course, I was in the very first group of the 12 of us who were selected for the first, it was like the beginning of the National Film School. Amongst those were Philip Noyce, who did Clear and Present Danger and Rabbit Proof Fence, and Chris Noonan, who did Babe. It was 6 years after that, you know, with many short films and things, that I was actually approached by Margaret Fink with this historic book, My Brilliant Career, that I actually hadn't read. I grew up as an urban Australian. I hated all that push of, you know, we're Aussies in the outback and all that, because I'd never even been to the outback. And so, you know, I had no interest in this book. But when I read it, I loved the fact that it was really amazingly insightful and honest. Miles Franklin, her real name was Stella Miles Franklin, she wrote it at age 16 in 10 weeks, and she was like a girl from the bush, and the whole story that now, of course, years later, after I spent a lot of time researching Louisa M. Alcott for Little Women, because I always thought, how did Miles have these thoughts? You know, there were the thoughts about why does a woman's role have to be so narrow? Why is there, you know, is there only the option of marriage and so on? And of course, now I realise she would have read Little Women.
Yes.
Those thoughts would have come from Louisa. So it was only after I did Little Women and I was talking about that film that I realised there was such a wonderful connection. And actually, you know, I turned down Little Women like 3 times because I said, I've done a story about it, someone who wants to be a writer, I don't want to go back to do that, I don't want to do another period film. But now I feel sort of it was right and I was meant to. But to answer your question about the 46 years, sorry. So Australia actually had a really healthy film industry in the 30s. And there were 3 women, sisters, the McDonough sisters. One was the writer, one was the producer, director, and one was a star. And they produced, and they were very successful at the box office. They were sort of society comedies. Perhaps, I think they did about 7 films. Sadly, and this is why it's so important, there are people here today fighting for film preservation and fighting to still see films on the big screen. There's only one section like that runs for 10 minutes from their whole work of 7 films. Wow. And if you think of it, I mean, that was amazing. In all the world, that there was this team that female team, produced, wrote, and starred in their own films. So yes, when it was announced that I was directing My Brilliant Career, and it was actually the biggest budget, even though it was, 900,000 or something, for a first-time director, and I was very aware of it, and I was frightened about even taking on the project. I was hoping that it would take so long for my producer, Margaret Fink, to raise the money that I would maybe have done a small contemporary film first. And I did say to Philip Noyce, who was my film school pal, who was directing his first feature that year, Newsfront, which is a beautiful film, I said, yes, it is. Well, like Phil, if you fail, it's Philip Noyce can't do it. If I fail, it's all women can't do it. So there was, I mean, truly stories about me in the press, and this young woman's going out to the desert to direct this film. Will she faint and fall over? Will she laugh? So there was a lot at stake, which I just basically had to block to do my job.
So I want to ask a couple. I want to get to the casting of Judy Davis because she was an unknown, but I do want to make sure to talk about, as I was saying before, one of the hallmarks, I think, of all of your films is the incredible production design. Every element of it, from the clothes to the, This Is So Full and Little Women and all of these films. And does that come from your art background, and are you involved with the production design very closely?
Yes, no, I am very closely involved. When I went to art school, I did think that I thought, maybe I could be a costume designer or a set designer, and then realised I only had about 5 ideas for costumes. And when I did those, I was like, oh, okay, next, I think I'll do something else. But so I look at films, and I think it's so important because you see everything. Sometimes you don't even know why something doesn't feel right or real. I mean, my personal fetish is how bad wigs are, and so many American films are like, oh, look at that wig. I mean, it can take me completely out of the film. So, I'm all over them. And I was so lucky, though, to have Luciana Righi as my costume and production designer on My Brilliant Career. She was Australian, half Italian, half Australian, and been working in London, was back in Australia doing a small film. She later went on to win the Academy Award for Howard's End, but she worked with Ken Russell and John Schlesinger and done wonderful films, and she worked again with me on Mrs. Sofel. But the sad thing about Brilliant Career was Luci was so wonderful, so hardworking, and got such a amazing brain. She gave the credit to her head of wardrobe because she just said, Anna, you did such a wonderful job, and I've got the production designer credit. You can have costume because, and this is important for you all to know, we really never thought this film would ever go anywhere except Australia. And I just hope that we'd get an audience in Australia, and more than our parents. And it was an absolute shock how it took off around the world. So when the costume design was nominated for Academy Award, we rang them and they said, well, it's the name on the credits. We said we can offer you evidence to show you that Luci did the design. Yes. So I was so pleased that she finally got the Academy Award for Howard's End. And now the casting of Judy Davis, who is an unknown. This was her first film, and what was it about? Did you read a lot of women to audition? I did read maybe 100. We obviously knew we were looking for someone who was up and coming. When I started the casting, our show cast directory, which is of course now online, but it was a big book, and I saw this photo of this young woman, and I said to the casting director, there's something about her, who's that? And she said, oh, don't even think about it, she's not available. She has just graduated from NIDA. She was in the same year as Mel Gibson. NIDA's like our RADA drama school. And they did the most incredible production of Romeo and Juliet. It which I wish I'd seen. But she's signed to a theatre company in South Australia, a small theatre, to carry a spear and be a maid in the background. So, so I saw people, and I put this person out of my head. And as it turned out, the money was on and off, and it took a bit of time. And then when we finally tested the best of all the 100 and so girls, our main backers, who were the New South Wales government, said, one of them was a big film buff, and he thought he could play Hollywood executive. He said, "She's the lead of the film. We want a 35mm screen test," like in old Hollywood days when we were testing on video. And they gave us the money to do it, so we got hair, makeup, and a wonderful cinematographer and so on. And anyway, it was one of those terrible moments in life where, looking back on the big screen, which just shows how important it is compared to the little screen, I have to say Michael Thornhill, this executive, was right. The producer and I looked at each other in the dark, and we both shook our heads and knew this other girl was wrong. And I had been attached to the film for 6 months, learning to ride a horse and reading about the period. I would have actually gone, "Oh, well, we can't do it to her," and I would have made the film with her, thinking I'll somehow make her better. So I was really lucky. I just had this really strong producer who had the same taste as me, and she went, "Jill, we can't do it." So we had to let her go, but we let her go at that point, thinking we've got nobody. And then, obviously, the first person we told was the casting agent. She said, "Well, guess what? That young actress, Judy Davis, is back in Sydney. She didn't last the whole year in South Australia under her contract. I don't know whether she asked to go or they asked her perhaps to leave. I don't think Judy was ever a good background person. Apparently her knitting in rehearsals got very annoying to the other actors. And they said, "So we're going to send her the script." And I said, sure. So the next morning, she came in with just Hilary, the casting director, and she read it, and I'd heard 100 people read that same scene, and it was just like a knockout. I mean, I had chills down my spine. It wasn't just like how amazing this is for us, but I just knew I was in the presence of like a